Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's presentation on what is Aquamation with special guest speaker, Joslin Roth. So just a little bit about People's Memorial Association as we get started. We were founded in Seattle in 1939. We are the oldest and largest memorial society in the US, and we're the only nonprofit in Washington providing funeral education advocacy. We are also an affiliate of the Funeral Consumers Alliance. And so membership in People's Memorial allows you access to our 69 sister organizations across the US. Currently, People's Memorial has almost 215,000 members have joined in our 80-year history, and we have approximately 70,000 living members. Membership entitles you to information and education around all sorts of death care topics. We do arrange for discounted pricing at partnering funeral homes, including Resting Waters, a pet funeral home you will learn more about today. We also have contracts with a few cemeteries and a monument company. And we want to make sure that all of our members will always be treated with dignity and respect, never experience sales pressure, and are active in their participation with People's Memorial. New memberships are $50 a person, and that also gives you part ownership in the Co-op Funeral Home, one of the only not-for-profit funeral homes in the US that serves the general public. We do these educational programs. Our Ducks in a Row workshop is a comprehensive workshop about estate planning, advanced directives, and funeral planning. And we also do these single subject programs we call our Ducket List programs, because we want to empower you with the information to make whatever choices are best for you and your family around end of life. And so we can help you get your planning documents in order. We screen the funeral homes that we work with for you, and we negotiate price discounts for our members. We want to make sure that there's no nonsense prices and no surprises, and we guarantee no sales pressure with any of our partnering funeral homes. And we do support our member families in need with our Cremation Assistance Fund for people who don't even have access to the funds for a basic cremation. We advocate on your behalf, offering greener burial and cremation options and greener dispositions options, such as Aquamation, that you're going to learn more about this evening. And we do a pricing survey every 2 years. We look at the pricing for all the funeral homes in Washington state so that you have a better idea of the costs around where you live so you can make choices that are best for your family. Because we want everyone to be able to make educated end-of-life choices that reflect their own personal values and are within their own family's budget. We want you to think about what you want, talk about your wishes with your loved ones, and put it in writing today. And with that, I am happy to introduce Joslin Roth of Resting Waters, Seattle's pet funeral home, to tell us more about Aquamation. Joslin?
Hi, good evening. I hope you can see me. I just turned on my video. Nora, can you confirm if you
I can see you. Hello.
Wonderful. I just can't see myself. Okay. So as Nora said, my name is Joslin Roth. I'm the founding owner of Resting Waters Aquamation. In addition to being the founding owner, I actually do perform Aquamation alongside our staff members. And we were the first in the state of Washington to offer this to the public for their pet companions. And we were active in making sure that this bill got passed for our human loved ones as well. So this talk is a little bit about the science of alkaline hydrolysis. We choose to call that process Aquamation. Alkaline hydrolysis is the legal term, but I know that People's Memorial is going to choose to use Aquamation as well, as it's a good term, just sort of in comparison to cremation. It helps sort of inspire that idea of what we're doing. Alkaline hydrolysis leaves a lot of questions on the table. So if Nora would like to get started on the slideshow. So alkaline hydrolysis comes with a lot of various names. Some people say water cremation or hydrocremation, resumation, flameless cremation, bio-cremation, aquacremation, green cremation, and of course we use the term aquamation as it's just a very simple roll off your tongue word to use. Next slide, Nora. Okay, so the science of alkaline hydrolysis. How does alkaline hydrolysis work? It is essentially what happens in nature if you were to place a loved one into the ground. So we accelerate that by creating the most advantageous environment using heat and water in motion. And in about 20 hours for our process, we're able to reduce the soft tissue back to its natural form, and it gets dissolved in the water, leaving behind the mineral components of the bone and teeth, which is the same material that's left in cremation. We just get there using a slower process. And so the ash that is returned is that same mineral component of the bone and teeth. In flame-based cremation, there may also be a little bit of clothing left behind or whatever casket the loved one was placed in. In aquamation, that doesn't happen, as anything that would be placed with the body would need to be a protein, an animal protein that could be dissolved in the water as well. And so those cremated remains are the same mineral remains that you receive in cremation. They just tend to be lighter in color and a little bit softer material, so you don't see the same bone fragments that you would potentially with flame-based cremation. The minerals seem to soften quite a bit with aquamation, leaving a really fine ash remain. It is safe to handle those remains as they're just calcium phosphate, and they are disease-free. They're free of anything like if you had chemotherapy or HIV, AIDS, anything like that. It all breaks down in the process itself, leaving behind just those clean mineral ash remains. And as to whether or not the system requires supervision, it really doesn't. Once the system has been loaded and started, it basically operates itself. So unlike flame cremation that does need a little bit of tending, alkaline hydrolysis is pretty simple and straightforward. The system itself does everything needed. And so in the human system, it can take anywhere between 6 and 8 hours if you're using a high pressure system. And if you're using a low pressure system like ours, which is slow and takes some time, it's between 18 and 20 hours. So whoever is operating the alkaline hydrolysis system gets to just place everything inside, hit start, and they can go about doing anything else that needs to be done at the funeral home during that time. Next slide. All right, so it has been legalized in about 20 different states in the United States, as well as I believe 4 territories, and it is in various parts of Canada and in Europe, Asia as well. Why people choose alkaline hydrolysis? A lot of people say that they find it to be gentle and respectful. In comparison to flame, it does have this low and slow approach that at least for most of us, we find to be comforting. A lot of people really love that it's actually water if they're drawn to that process or if they've spent a lot of time in their lifetime on the water. For our pet companions, we get a lot of families who come to us because their loved one loved to be on the water or they were afraid of fire. There are 0 emissions of harmful greenhouse gases. We use electricity and not gas, so it can be operated with a wind system or a solar energy system. Anything that can create energy can allow you to use alkaline hydrolysis. It has a very low energy consumption, so it really only uses about 5% the energy that's needed for flame-based cremation. And it's 1/10 of the carbon footprint of cremation. So the human aquamation high temperature is a pressurized system. It does have the ability to customize the sizes, and the turnaround time is about 4 a day, between 3 and 4. It can take as little as 6 hours and as much as 8 for that particular system. And then in the pressurized system, it runs at about a 300-degree temperature in comparison to flame-based cremation, which uses temperatures of about 1800 degrees. And then as you can see, it uses about 65 psi, depending on the selected operation temperature. Next slide. Okay. And then what's needed? For alkaline hydrolysis, we do everything based on the weight of the loved one. So in the human systems, they actually have a weight inside of that system that allows the operator to have an accurate weight of the decedent. In our system, we hand weigh each loved one that we place into our alkaline hydrolysis system. A lift table. This helps to ensure that whoever's operating the system doesn't end up accidentally hurting themselves. A remains processor, which is the same thing that's used in flame-based cremation, but that's what helps us give back that nice, fine mineral ash that we give back to our families. Some places decide to use a convection oven or a tumble dryer, and this allows them to return remains in a really small time frame. At Resting Waters, we choose to let the remains air dry, so we actually have a designated room in our space that each loved one is placed in their own individual compartment and just left to air dry. And this allows us to be even more energy efficient than we would be otherwise. You do need a hot water heater. It would take a really long time for the system to self-heat, although it does have its own heating mechanism. We'd like to start with water that has already been heated. And then the alkali. So a lot of places choose to use sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide. The only one that's actually necessary for the system is the potassium hydroxide. So some companies like ours choose to run with potassium hydroxide only. And then a scale that you can weigh those chemicals out. The human machines, again, they're a little bit more sophisticated than what I get to use, and those systems actually weigh and discharge the chemical directly into the system. And then we, for our own safety, always wear our PPE gear, so goggles, respirators, gloves, anything to keep us safe while we are performing the aquamation. So this is a really great example of the human aquamation system. As you can see, there's an inner basket that slides in and out, and it can lower and lift to help place the decedent in. There is a lid that unlatches, a pull gurney alongside the basket. That all helps to transfer the deceased. Then you would need to place the lid and slide the basket back into the aquamation system. Add the alkali to the system, shut and lock the door, and place the machine into the horizontal or angled operating position. So this is an example of the horizontal operating position. And the next slide shows it in the angled operating position. So by angling the system, they can use less water, less energy, less alkali, lower the operating cost and the maintenance. Keeping the liquid off the seals is really important. The seals can break down, and then it's just a replacement issue at that point. And it also makes the collecting of the remains easier. So once we've loaded our system in any of the systems, then we set the system to operate as customized as we needed to. So again, we can change the temperature, we can change the length of time that the system operates. Really, we can dial it into what the needs are for that specific cycle. So if you're doing a small child, you could reduce the water flow, or when we're doing small companion animals, we again can reduce the water flow just so it's a more gentle process for that smaller loved one. And if you had a larger loved one, you can do the opposite. So you can set it to the highest water flow option, and also increase the length of time if need be. And then here you can see at the end of the human process, this is what remains at the bottom of the system. So you can see it's really pretty much a whole skeleton at that point. There's femurs, and I've creatively covered up the little skulls for you so that you didn't have to see that. But then we collect the remains, we place them on a drying tray, and again, then they can be placed into an oven or a tumble dryer, or like how we do it, you can let them air dry as well. And after that process, then we cremulate the bones into the ash remains. And this is us pulverizing in our system at Resting Waters. So we collect the individual fragmented bone, we place it into the cremulator. It really only takes several seconds, so I'm not sure about the human system, but for our largest companion animals, I wouldn't say that we run the cremulator for more than about 30 seconds. And then you can see we collect the ash to place in the urn. So here is a beautiful example of aquamated human remains. You can see they're really bright white, and they tend to be really, really fine powder ash, sort of the consistency of baby powder. And then the inurnment process is exactly the same. So however you want your loved one to be inurned, they can be inurned that way with aquamation as well. This is a lovely example of a funeral home, I believe in Canada. So the room that the family can sit in to witness the aquamation has water in the background, and a really nice sitting area with this beautiful window view for the family to watch the system for a witnessed aquamation. And then, you know, aquamation has been around for a really long time, probably about 30 years. It's been used at many universities across the United States. So Duke University, UCLA, the Mayo Clinic, Texas A&M, and I know that I believe Kansas State University also has a system on their campus. Feedback from families that we get all the time is that they're grateful to have choices in the marketplace. For a lot of families, flame-based cremation doesn't feel right for them. And a lot of our families really do come to us because we are water specific. They also come to us because of the environmental benefits, and you know, just for all kinds of personal choices, if they believe that they're a water sign or their loved one is a water sign. And a lot of times it really is based on that green factor, that we're more gentle on the environment. So if you are a good steward of the earth, why wouldn't you want to make as good of an impact at the end of your life and in your death as you possibly could?
Thank you so much, Joslin, for that overview. So we wanted to share this information with you because in Washington State, we did just legalize aquamation. Alkaline hydrolysis and natural organic reduction were legalized last year. The state has been writing the rules and regulations, and the law that got passed as of May 1st legalized these two options. Of course, due to the pandemic, both options have been delayed for various reasons. The licensing and the permitting process has really slowed down. The one place that I know of that is putting in an alkaline hydrolysis machine in Washington State, the machine is manufactured in the UK. There's a little bit of travel restrictions right now, and the company in the UK has to send their own technicians to set up the machine, and that can't happen right now. So I know that that place was eager to be able to offer alkaline hydrolysis for humans beginning in May. it doesn't look like that's happening. I shouldn't say that. It's not happening. When I spoke with the owner of that facility a few days ago, his biggest hope is that with restrictions being lifted, he might be able to be up and running by the end of the summer. I talked with someone at the state yesterday to see if anyone else in Washington has talked about applying for the permits to put in a system, and she had not heard of anyone yet. So there is the care facility that is putting it in is based outside of Seattle, and several funeral homes use it for a care facility. They do cremations and preparations on site for many funeral homes. So many funeral homes will have access to be able to provide their families with this process once the machine is up and running. The other big question we often get asked is, what will it cost? And we don't know quite yet. Even the facility isn't sure what they're going to be charging yet, because they don't know what all the costs to put in the system are going to be. In general, in other states that have legalized this process and implemented it, it seems to be about twice the cost of cremation. Through our price survey, we know that the price of cremation, even in Washington state, varies by 400%. But in general, it seems to be that when alkaline hydrolysis comes to an area, it usually costs about twice the amount that cremation costs in that area. There have been some occasions of funeral homes putting in the system and just deciding to offer it for the same price as flame-based cremation. And some have had more success than others. It really depended on how quickly the facility wanted to recoup their costs for putting in the new system. So there's a lot of variables. I just don't have good answers for you quite yet. So I know that those are the two main questions I know I get a lot, and Beverly has been keeping an eye on the questions both here in Zoom and on Facebook. If it's working over there, I had to play with it a little bit. I apologize if it didn't work over there. But both Joslin and I are now just here and available to answer any questions that we might be able to at this point about this topic. Beverly?
Hello, coming at you live from the office all by myself.
You.
Yeah, I'm holding it down, guys. We do have a couple of questions in here that you guys might like to address. One of them was about kind of the future of aquamation in Washington. Do we know about any academic institutions like the University of Washington potentially looking into it or interested in offering it?
I don't know. That's an excellent question. With so many medical schools having implemented it already, I wouldn't be surprised if it might be on the list for either University of Washington or Washington State University to put that in at some point. I just haven't heard of it being implemented quite yet.
Okay. And we have a couple folks that are interested to know what happens to the water that remains after the aquamation, the effluent. Where does it go?
So it depends. Right now, the Co-op Funeral Home is able to offer aquamation through a facility in Oregon, where it has been available for many years. And that cost, I copied and pasted it somewhere, but of course I don't have it open in front of me. For members, it's I think $15.85. For non-members, I think it's like $17.95 or something like that. Ooh, and then but that includes also the travel to and from Portland from our offices in Seattle. That facility actually has a deal with a few grass seed farmers outside of Portland. The Central Oregon is a grass seed capital of the world. And so there's a couple of farmers that have a deal to use the effluent as a fertilizer on their farms. I know of also a few pet aquamation facilities in Portland that do the same thing, because agriculture is huge throughout the central part of Oregon. So but it's also not a lot of edible crops, whereas Washington, we've got more apples and other crops that people might not like the idea of the effluent being used on those, even though it's a great fertilizer. So we'll see. A lot of places, it just goes into the state, into the city or municipal sewer system. And Jocelyn may be able to talk a little bit more about how her process works. Jocelyn, are you there?
I am. Yes, so at Resting Waters, we don't really have a good option for storage of the effluent, and we have not had a farm reach out to us about possibility of using it as fertilizer. So for us, it just does go directly into wastewater. The effluent is DNA free and RNA free, so it's perfectly safe to be placed back into the wastewater system. And I've heard, at least from other areas, that the municipal system often feels like it's a benefit to their system. So whatever happens naturally in the process, they say it actually helps them on their end of things as they're breaking down human waste and taking care of the stuff through their own system. So it really is a way to just recycle those remains back and allow them to continue to do useful things for the environment.
Yeah, and I know the facility in Portland does test the pH of their effluent, and they can neutralize it if it's too alkaline or either way. It's actually, because you need to balance the alkaline with an acid, it actually kind of smells like lemonade because it's probably a citric acid of some kind that they use to balance it. So that was just an interesting thing to see when I went and toured that facility in Portland.
Yeah, and we can adjust our pH as well, but we use like soda. So like almost like injecting soda water into it. But
Speaking of the chemistry, Jocelyn, we actually had someone with some questions about the chemicals you guys work with. We had a participant who was interested to know about why you decided to use potassium hydroxide only.
So typically the reason why sodium hydroxide is used is actually because it's less expensive than the potassium. However, it isn't as strong. So for us, we found that we liked the results better by eliminating the sodium. There's a little bit of chemistry, and it depends on your altitude. It depends on the quality of your water. So if you have really hard water or really soft water, you sort of have to dial it in based on where you live and see what works best for your area. So for us, we found through a little trial and error that we just preferred using just the potassium hydroxide.
Wonderful. How much water, since you have mentioned you have worked with all sizes of animal companions, maybe you can give us an idea of what to expect for how much water is used during this process, say for maybe just a 100-pound loved one, a real pocket-sized person.
So the way that our system works is actually partitioned. We do what's called a half cycle or a full cycle. And I know that with a full cycle, which for us is up to 400 pounds total weight. So if we had, 13 different loved ones in their own little individual compartments within our larger system, and they came to 375 pounds. We're using less water than a family of 4 does. I'd have to re-look up the exact gallons, but I want to say that each full cycle is somewhere around 250 gallons of water. We choose not to add the secondary rinse cycle, so we hand rinse our remains just using a hose. But if we were to run the rinse cycle, then it drains and refills with clean water and then does sort of a circulated rinse for, as long as you set it for, but most people do, somewhere around an hour in that circulated rinse. For us, we felt like it was a waste of water. We can do the same thing, just rinsing with a hose, and it uses a fraction of the water. So essentially they say each family member uses about 100 gallons a day of water at home. So we use less than 400 at the office.
I'm kind of surprised. I visited your facility this past year, and it's pretty substantial. I didn't realize, though, that it could hold such weight. One of the participants is kind of curious about that. They said, do they make different sizes of machines or baskets to accommodate larger bodies?
They do. So there is as small as, it's called a PET 100. And the idea is that it would be a really great system for a group of smaller animals, or a private system with one animal up to 100 pounds. And then they have systems that go up to like 2,500 pound weight. So within the system internally, there are these interchangeable baskets, and they have sort of these sliding compartments that allow us to make the units as big or as small as we need them to be. So for us, the smallest unit that we can divide into can hold about a 13-pound loved one or smaller. And then the largest basket would hold roughly 200 pounds. And typically, actually, it could be more than 200 pounds. We say that each slot within our system holds about 25 pounds. So we Tetris it to whatever grouping we need it to be. But there's a gentleman in Spokane who has the same system that I have, and he actually does wildcats. So he's done tigers, and apparently there's a sanctuary out there. So he's done quite a few big cats, big wildcats.
That's wild. Well, we do have a couple people that are really interested in your work specifically, Joslin. Is your machine noisy? Is that why that Canadian example had a window?
I would not say that it is noisy. It makes sort of a high-pitched whistle, and that has something to do with the mechanism that allows the water to flow. You can't hear the water flowing. You can hear the water filling, but once it's filled, then really the only noise that you hear is sort of a high-pitched whistle. If you're outside of the building, you can't really hear it much.
Yeah, and for human machines, when I've heard it, it's significantly quieter than a cremation retort. And it was hard to say what it did sound like because it was in the same room as a cremation retort. So I couldn't hear anything, but there was also other sound in the room that was very much drowning it out. So it was much quieter than a cremation, so I can at least say that much.
Someone's interested in potentially becoming an aquamation operator. Is there a licensure process, or how does one learn how to do it?
There will be. This is something that the state is still working on. The state, in legalizing alkaline hydrolysis, natural organic reduction, is actually creating a new licensing program for operators for those systems. And that is part of that hasn't been established quite yet due to the pandemic slowing everything down. So there will be a training and licensure for operators for this equipment. What that looks like, I don't know yet.
Okay. Someone else is curious. It might be a little on the kind of grosser side, but is it kind of stinky to work alongside the machine?
While the machine is operating, there's really very little scent to it. It's pretty well sealed. So I kind of joke, we use little Tide Pods in our system, and I can smell those. And then the alkali definitely has its own scent as well. At discharge, you can smell a scent. I would say that it reminds me of the fertilizers, like the fish fertilizer. It's similar to that. And then when you open it, it also has that scent, but not for long. Once you start rinsing everything off, the scent goes away pretty quickly.
Some folks are kind of curious about, prior to undertaking the aquamation process, is it possible, oh, I'm sorry, I misread this. Is there a possible period of time between the aquamation taking place and the cremulation taking place to preserve some bones, maybe the skull or some bones from the hands or feet?
So the bone is pretty degraded at that point, although it does appear whole. As soon as we start moving it, it sort of fragments into smaller pieces. For us at Resting Waters, because we take care of pet companions and the rules that govern how we care for them are very loose in general, we can help families who wish to preserve specific bones. So skull cleaning is one of our most sought after options. And we do work with outside parties who offer that service. So we work with a biologist from the Burke Museum.
Wow.
As well as a young woman who has a beetle colony and does skull preservation and bone preservation at home. So there are options for us in the pet world. Those options don't exist in the human world.
Yeah, and in the human world, the remains have to be pulverized to a point that they are unrecognizable as bone. We have had a few folks with religious backgrounds that part of that is acquiring pieces of bone after cremation. And so family members come and they choose 1 or 2 pieces of bone to keep out before it is pulverized. But it's supposed to be pulverized to a point that it's not recognizable, and that's in the Washington State Code. But again, with religious exemptions, there are certain things you can do. But after both processes, the bones are extremely brittle, and you can just break them apart with your fingers. So it's really hard to, keep a skull or something like that.
It's one of the odder questions that I get answering the phone here, and we get a lot of requests to preserve bones from family members, so I'm sure that you guys probably get quite a few of those at the pet funeral home as well.
We do, absolutely.
So we do have some questions about, I know Joslin, you guys are sort of leading the way in terms of making us available for pets, and you've been a big part of our advocacy works here in Washington to bring that to people. So folks are really curious about kind of where else Aquamation is available, or kind of how to get that process available to them. Do you know of anybody on the East Coast that offers these services?
So for pet care, I would say most states have an option, and even if it's not in their state, it's in a bordering state that they could easily access. And there's probably a list. If people are seeking care in other states, they can email us at Resting Waters, so hello@Resting Waters, and we can definitely get into touch with people all over. But Florida has several systems, Colorado has several systems, Texas has several systems. So really there are many pet facilities. Here in Washington State, we have 4. So we were the first to open. We opened in 2016, and since our opening, there's someone who is in Vancouver, right near Portland. There's also several systems in Portland. And then a lady in Bellingham who does flame decided to expand her services by offering alkaline hydrolysis. And she has reported that at least 50% of her families choose alkaline hydrolysis over cremation. There's a gentleman in Spokane that is operating as well. So again, in just a few short years, there's now 4 of us in Washington State. We're pretty far spread out, but we're here. So
it's wonderful.
Yeah, and for people, I think a lot of funeral homes and places are trying to figure out what the demand will be before they put in the infrastructure for it, because it's not a cheap system. It costs about $500,000 to install, and that'll take a long time to recover those costs. And so a lot of places are kind of waiting to see what the demand is. But for how successful it's been in other places, and especially kind of the culture in at least the western side of Washington State, I can see it becoming very popular. But like I said, at the Co-op Funeral Home, we are providing that service by going down to Oregon right now. We go down once or twice a month right now for people who want to use that service for some of the reasons that Joslin mentioned. The lower environmental impact, the idea of water is preferable to flame for those families. It's really about what works best for the individual.
So someone is curious about it. That's a pretty substantial starting cost for that new equipment. Is that why the cost is so different between aquamation and traditional cremation, just the cost of new machines?
It is, and it'll be interesting to see once facilities are able to recover the costs for installing the equipment. As we've seen around the country, the costs start to come down once their capital outlay is recovered. And so hopefully that'll be the same case here in Washington.
We saw the same thing happen with cremation about 50 or 60 years ago. So I think it's probably pretty accurate to expect the same.
Yeah.
We do have some questions for some folks that are a little bit more curious about the numbers we use to talk about the environmental impact of aquamation versus a more traditional cremation. Could you guys talk a little bit more about the research behind that, especially when we talk about like 1/10 of the carbon footprint? Where do we get those numbers from?
Sure. I went to a green funeral conference last year, and this was part of my questions because a lot of these numbers, I'm like, are these just like marketing statistics? Like, where are these coming from? And we have our European friends to thank for a lot of these numbers because the studies have been done independently, not by the manufacturers or the people that are selling the particular machines. And so it was numbers that came out of, I think it was the UK and France, and one of the other Scandinavian countries. I'm going to not say which one because it'll be wrong, but one of like Sweden or Norway, one of those. And so through those studies, they did a few different angles of how to research it. And it was comparing flame-based cremation to alkaline hydrolysis and going back both for the actual process itself in terms of the energy used for cremations using natural gas, that the amount of energy used can actually vary kind of widely depending on the age of the machine, how efficient it is. And so there's some flexibility in those numbers as well. So they kind of took the middle of that because newer machines are much more efficient and use less energy, but most machines out there are 30 or 40 years old. And so the reality is that's really the amount of energy being used. So for machines that are, I want to say less than 20 years old, for a single cremation, it uses about the same amount of energy and produces the same amount of emissions as a car running through 2 tanks of gas. So that comparison helped me kind of frame what it is, because it's not nothing. I mean, of course, right now we're not driving anywhere. It takes me a little while to run through a tank of gas in my car. But on a normal basis, I was, filling up my tank maybe twice a month. And so it's basically 1 month's car usage for me to be cremated. But with alkaline hydrolysis, there are no emissions. You don't even need a smokestack or anything. There are no emissions from the process at all. So that's an easy comparison. There's nothing that is going into the air. You do have the water outlay, which again, depending on the kind of machine, depends on how much water it uses, whether it's low pressure, high pressure, things like that. And so there's some areas that water usage isn't as big a deal as others. So like in the continental United States Southwest, water usage is a much bigger deal than maybe here in the Pacific Northwest. So it's about figuring out more what speaks to you. I don't think like Arizona or New Mexico might be installing these machines anytime soon because they don't get as much rain, and water is a much more precious, finite resource there than it is for here in the Pacific Northwest. So that's where we get those numbers and why I feel confident sharing them, because they're not just coming from manufacturers, they're coming from these independent studies in Europe.
That's really interesting. We did actually have someone ask about what's going on in Europe. It sounds like there's a lot of research being conducted. Is aquamation more widely available there, or is it treated differently? What's going on?
Again, it depends on where. There are some places, I can't speak to where it's more popular than others, but in general, a lot of the funeral and cemetery laws, it's older land. And so, for example, in most of Europe, cemetery doesn't mean forever. You rent cemetery spaces. Some places it's as short as 5 years, other places you might get it for 90 years, but cemetery plots are expected to be reused in Europe. And that's a very foreign concept here in the United States, because a plot means forever in the United States. And that sounds very weird to Europeans. So there's just kind of a different attitude about it. There's also a little bit less land to cover in Europe. It's more densely populated than, United States urban centers, yes, are densely populated, but we've got lots of open land as well. So every country has their own laws and regulations and traditions and religious backgrounds. And so there's a lot of variation all across Europe on this as well. But a lot of the new technology is actually coming out of Europe. Like I said, the machine that the local care facility here in King County is going to be using is manufactured in the UK. But I don't think it's actually legal to do alkaline hydrolysis in the UK unless that's changed in the last year or so. I'm not up on my British law at the moment, unfortunately.
Why not?
I know.
Is it okay if we actually say what the facility is, which one that is planning to offer Aquamation? Someone is asking.
It's a care facility that just serves other funeral homes, and so they don't normally like their name being shared because they don't serve the public. We do actually, well, not right now, but in better times, in safer times, we do tours of that facility. And if you're interested in seeing it, we're happy to give tours once this current pandemic has passed. And we like to be very transparent with how we work and what happens. But the facility that we use does ask that they're not open to the public unless we are bringing them there. So that's why I'm not sharing that. It's not a big secret, but they don't serve the public, so they don't want phone calls from the public or emails or that. But if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me. And once it's safe, I can arrange a tour at the facility for you.
Do we have time for more questions? There's more.
Sure, we have about 10 more minutes.
Okay. All right, guys, let's see. So speaking of the pandemic, I know that Joslin had touched a little bit on this before about the remains after the aquamation process being devoid of RNA and DNA. So one of our participants is kind of curious, are there certain causes of death, either for pet companions or for people, that would preclude being aquamated? As any infectious disease or any conditions a body might be in that we couldn't do this process?
I don't believe so. And actually, alkaline hydrolysis is one of the safer proven methods for people or animals who die of prion disease to safely dispose of those remains, because alkaline hydrolysis, it destroys the prions, which actually flame-based cremation doesn't guarantee to do it, burial, anything like that. It is not guaranteed to destroy those prions. So alkaline hydrolysis has actually been used by research universities, especially if there's livestock that have been infected with a prion disease. That's the safest way to dispose. And so it's one of the safest ways to dispose of remains that we know about, actually.
And the only talk I've heard at all is that Ebola would not necessarily be a disease that we would want to use with alkaline hydrolysis. I had sort of assumed the opposite, but a biologist who works with one of the systems here in the United States said it actually would not be a preferable means to care for the loved one after they died. So that's the only one that I know of that seems questionable.
I know that you've mentioned this to us before at PMA, Joslin, but could you talk a little bit about any limitations there might be in terms of what else is placed in the machine? I know with cremation, a lot of times folks want to send off with, favorite clothes or a mug or something like that. What kind of limitations can we expect?
So essentially, nothing that is not a protein, I don't know why I couldn't say that, will break down. So if you placed your loved one into the system with anything, be it a necklace or a toy or a blanket, it will not break down in the system. We do allow certain trinkets to come into the system. So we allow stones. They're pretty benign. It's not going to hurt anything. Hard toys we allow. We have done rosaries and things like that. So aluminum is not preferable because it mixed with the potassium hydroxide causes a very special gas. So now granted, it would have to be a fairly large amount. So, and it will eat aluminum. So that's an interesting, I don't know why it breaks down. I think it's because it causes that gas, right? So I'm not a scientist here. Don't quote me, but I did just watch a fascinating video on YouTube about soda cans and alkaline hydrolysis, essentially. But So, you know, we do limit what we allow families to put into the system. You could not shroud a body in anything that wasn't an animal protein. So I think it will depend on the state regulations for humans, if they require a vessel of some sort. I know that there are bio bags that are made to break down in the system. So that would be an option outside of shrouding. But really, if your nanny had on a necklace, it would just come out shiny and sterilized. So I think, again, that's going to be a preference for the operator. But like glass eyes or pacemakers, everything's fine. You know, we get knees, we get sutures that are, you know, little plastic sutures come out the other side. So we found faux eyes and all kinds of medical equipment. And
Wow.
And it's actually a discussion that's happening among funeral directors right now is the ceremony around cremation is actually fairly recent, that since cremation has become more accepted and widely used, people have been creating more ceremony around it, placing items to be cremated with them, making sure that their loved one is dressed in a way they wanted to be, sending with notes or personal items and stuff like that, because in flame-based cremation, everything's incinerated. It all goes away with the exception of a few things. We can't put glass, nothing, no batteries, those explode, no thank you. Pacemakers have to be removed in flame-based cremation. They will not have to be removed for alkaline hydrolysis. But with alkaline hydrolysis, any clothing or personal items can actually harm the system because they aren't being broken down. And so choosing the coverings or anything else that go in that can be easily removed, or it just becomes a little bit more acceptable that we go out of this world the way we came into it. The facility that we use in Portland does keep the body covered with just a sheet until it's fully in, and then they pull off the sheet and close the door to keep the dignity of the deceased. So you're not sitting out in your birthday suit for very long. They keep it very dignified. But it is a change of our ceremonial mind of we can't place other things in there. But the benefit is that titanium hips, pacemakers, any medical equipment, dentures, the gold in our teeth, all of this is fully recoverable from alkaline hydrolysis and can be recycled. They're even talking about some of the joints being able to be reused. We can't reuse medical devices in the US, but there's other countries that accept it, so they could be sent to places to be reused at a much cheaper rate than other things. So there's going to be things like that that are definitely a benefit, but the machine does not break down absolutely everything, and so we need to be more careful about what goes into it at the same time.
So folks are a little bit curious about that birthday suit issue. In terms of what our options are in terms of our last outfits, I know that Joslin had alluded to a bio bag, and there's some concerns about, you know, since only animal fiber is going to break down, you know, if someone was shrouded in silk, what would happen? Or is it just, are we really expecting to help families manage their expectations and let them know that the decedent is going to have to be nude in the machine?
So anything that's an animal-based protein, but those are also much more expensive. And so, yeah, silk and leather, sheepskin, things like that. Those do break down in the machine. But yeah, our go-to cotton linen, those do not break down. The other thing is any flowers or plant life do not break down in the machine. So we have a lot of folks now that are cremated with, you know, flowers or things like that, and that won't be able to go in the machine.
Has that been the case for you guys, Joslin, as well, for families that are interested in putting flowers in or anything like that?
it is. So our system at Resting Waters is we place them on top of the machine while it's operating. And we may put like a single flower in with the loved one just so that is present but not going to cause massive issues. So essentially it will come out exactly as it went in, maybe a little wilted, but otherwise still fully intact. So We've had situations where there's a lot of petals that have to be picked away. So our current arrangement is that we may place one flower in with your loved one and the others will stay with them on top of the system. And we've even had families ask us to then dry them and return them or process them in with the remains. So we have put dried flowers into the cremulator for families who wanted those flowers to stay with their loved one.
Oh, that's beautiful. We actually, it looks like we have quite a few animal lovers participating, and they are kind of curious that looking forward now that we have, or we're expecting to have access to aquamation for people. Do we know of any cemeteries or memorial grounds that would allow pet companions to be buried with their deceased family members? It's kind of a sticking point in some faiths, but what do we know about that?
It is a sticking point in some faiths, and it was actually only changed a couple of years ago until time doesn't mean anything right now, so I apologize for my
It's May 20th, Nora.
I don't remember if it was 2 years or 5 years ago, somewhat recent in my history, who knows what that means, that it was actually changed. Before that, you could not put pet remains in a human cemetery with the knowledge of the cemeterians. It was completely prohibited. There are many, many pet remains that were placed inside caskets and buried with their humans. I will admit that I may have been a participant in some of these, but I won't tell you where or when. You can't catch me, coppers. But as of a few years ago, that specific ban was lifted at the state level. So now it really is back to the cemetery deciding what their rules are. So some cemeteries have said, like, we've known this has happened for many years. We've just kind of gone like, we didn't see it. But there are some cemeteries that specifically still say no other remains other than the ones that are marked in there. The National Cemetery, Tahoma, our local national cemetery, still has the rule, like, only the remains of that person are in there. No pets, no like putting someone else's urn in there unless we know about it and they can properly be marked, those kinds of things. So it's a cemetery by cemetery issue, but it is now no longer illegal at the state level to have them in there.
Okay, so it's up to their discretion, it looks like.
Yes.
Okay. Speaking of up to folks' discretion, now that it is up, it is technically legal in Washington. Funeral homes and mortuaries could just start using it, assuming they could get access to the machines that we're struggling to get access to and somehow could pull all that together. It's kind of just up there now, yeah?
Yeah, and so like I said, I mean, the state hasn't gotten together with their permitting process and licensing process yet. They were supposed to have that done May 1st, but COVID-19 has rewritten the rules on a lot of things. But yes, any funeral home in Washington state that wants to put in the system, there will very soon be a path to legally doing that.
Wonderful. And speaking of the pandemic again, we did have a participant who wanted to check in on Resting Waters and see how you guys were handling things now that there's a bridge closure and a pandemic. How are things going over there for you guys?
You know, honestly, I would say that we've seen a slight increase in our cases at Resting Waters. I really think that with families being home 24 hours a day, days on end, they're starting to see that their loved one who they knew was older or knew wasn't feeling great is really not feeling great. So I think that with time on their hands, families are making choices right now with more knowledge, I guess, behind those choices. So we have seen an increase in our volume at Resting Waters. We're not meeting families face to face, but we've set up a really beautiful patio for them to bring their loved ones to us. We do offer in-home transportation, and given that our hours of operation are really the middle of the day, we haven't yet seen an issue with the closure. I know it's coming, but I don't know exactly, you know, when we'll start to see sort of that slowdown happen. So far, we're doing okay, and we're definitely, you know, we're here to help. So we're still operating 24 hours a day.
Wonderful.
And I want to acknowledge that it is 6 o'clock right now. And so we had said that this would last an hour. I'm okay to stick around and keep answering questions, but I want to be respectful of Joslin and Beverly's time. So it's up to you ladies if you want to stay, but I will stick around and answer questions for as long as people have them at this point.
Well, you have to pay me the longer I'm here, so that one's on you, Nora. I'm happy to be here.
How many more questions do we seem to have?
Not too many. Let's take a look back a little further.
And I am going to say my goodbye, though.
Okay,
So
thank you,
for
Joslin.
having me.
I just had one more quick one for you,
Okay,
Joslin.
sure.
There's a student participant right now who's really excited about this, and I think maybe they might be interested in reaching out to you guys in the future to help with a research project. Would it be okay if they contacted you?
Of course. Yes, absolutely. The best way to reach us is by email. Again, it's hello@restingwaters.com. That will contact me and Darcy. We're both the owners, and then we can either answer questions or, when we can give tours again, arrange for a tour. But we're always happy to help students, especially. So absolutely.
Thought you might say that.
Thank you, Joslin.
Yeah,
Thank you, Joslin.
Thank you. Bye, ladies.
All right, Nora, we got a few more.
Okay.
You ready?
I'm here.
Okay, so folks are interested in the financial planning side of things, keeping in mind that we should be expecting the cost to stay a little pricier than cremation. What can people do in terms of prepaying or pre-planning to be aquamated?
Sure. So we do have a disposition authorization form available on our website at peoplesmemorial.org. I'll talk for a while so maybe Beverly can find the link to that and drop it in the chat.
Sorry, what am I looking for? I was reading questions.
the Aquamation authorization form.
Okay.
So it is available on our website. The way the language is written right now is to basically say, I wish to be aquamated or use alkaline hydrolysis. If it is not available or is a financial detriment to my family, then you choose a backup plan. Fortunately, here in Washington, going to Portland isn't that much more expensive, but it is more expensive. And if you know what the costs are, then it's easier to set aside the funds for those. So that's a way to acknowledge that that's your first choice, but I do recommend having a backup plan in case it's not available. Especially right now, the wait might be a lot longer than some people are comfortable with doing. So there's other factors like that. In terms of prepayment, as with all funeral planning, you've got a few different options. You can prepay directly with a funeral home. Most funeral homes either use a trust or life insurance policies to set aside the funds. And there's various pros and cons for each one of those methods. Life insurance policies, the money is held with a third party. It's not reliant on the funeral home staying in business. A funeral home trust is paid directly to the funeral home and it's held in trust until the time of your death. But if you move, if you die out of state or on vacation, there are issues with both of those. And there's no guaranteeing. There's no more locking in the price today that'll pay for arrangements later on. There's still some funeral homes out there that do guarantee pricing. Not a lot of them do, though. A third option that we advocate for is just opening a savings account at your local bank or credit union. It's usually called a pay on death account. It's a savings account that you put a beneficiary on, someone who you trust to outlive you and be responsible for paying the bill at the funeral home at that time. So keeping in mind that the cost of aquamation will probably be about twice the cost of cremation, kind of looking at the costs at your local funeral home that you might be using and putting aside that maybe plus 10% in a savings account, and just having it set aside. And then you can always add money to it if you decide you want something different later, but then it stays with your family. You have access to it, you have control over it. So that's my general prepayment short talk. If you want more information directly about that, I would contact your local funeral home to see what their pricing are, if they're going to be offering aquamation when it becomes available in their area. I know we might have some people even outside of Washington on this webinar, so every state has its own rules and regulations around this, so you need to check with your local folks to get the most accurate information.
So we do actually have a bit of an international crowd here. We have some folks here from Germany and from Canada.
Ooh, Guten Tag.
Kind of cool. But we do have some folks with some specific Washington questions that they're kind of unclear about crossing state lines with a body. Would someone need to die in Washington to have an aquamation done here?
Nope.
How do they get access to it if they happen to die somewhere where they don't have it?
Yeah, so if you die somewhere that aquamation is not available, you need to use a local funeral home to where the death occurred to file all the local legal paperwork and arrange for the transportation. So depending how far it is, I mean, you can go by plane, train, automobile when you're transporting human remains. Like we said, like it's legal in Oregon, it's not available in Washington, but the Co-op Funeral Home for at least a year and a half has been offering aquamation because we file the legal paperwork here in Washington, the death certificate, we get the permit, and then we arrange for the transportation from the Seattle area down to Portland. So yes, it's perfectly legal to cross all state lines. You can even go into Canada, just driving. Amtrak carries human remains.
Really?
It's all perfectly legal. And of course, airplanes. Again, right now it's a little bit harder to do all of that transportation, but be aware, but it's perfectly legal to cross state lines. We even have families, there are some states that it's still legal to bury on your own private property. And so I believe Montana is one of them. And so we've had local families here who have land in Montana, and we file the legal paperwork here, and they literally put the casket in the back of their minivan and they drive grandma themselves to their land in Montana and do the burial themselves.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So our friends up in Canada are curious, what could they be doing up in their province to help bring aquamation to their area? Do you have any recommendations about how folks can get the ball rolling on that?
I'm very unfamiliar with Canadian law, but I assume it's somewhat similar to different state laws. There's probably a province government that issues the laws and rules and regulations for your particular province. And it's about getting a representative who works there to be an advocate for bringing that to your area. So we tried for about 3 years in a row to get alkaline hydrolysis legalized in Washington state, and we helped write the bill, but it wasn't until natural organic reduction got paired with us that we really had enough of a champion in the state Senate of Washington to really make sure that the bill went through. In the states, in Washington state, a bill is introduced on one side of the House, either the Senate or the House of Representatives. It starts in committee, it gets voted to the floor votes on it, it goes over to the other side, it goes to a committee, it goes to the floor, it gets voted on. And there can be changes along the way on either side of those, so any changes has to go back and be approved by the other side. It's very complicated. So you really need someone who knows how it works and knows what's going on to really keep an eye and make sure that it doesn't like get put on the bottom of a pile or get lost on someone's desk. So you really need a champion. Unfortunately, the best way to get things done is to be able to work with a lobbyist who trusts your cause, that they know how to get things done. That's why they exist. And so I don't know how Canadian law works and how things are changed, but you really need a champion at the government level to help you get those changes put in place.
I feel like that Schoolhouse Rock song kind of led us to believe it would have been a little bit easier to get that bill passed in our own state, but
yeah,
a lot of work.
That song's like 35 years old, still accurate.
It's a lot of work for sure. And speaking actually of recomposition, we do have some folks that are kind of interested. They know that that was the other half of the bill. Could you talk a little bit about what the differences between aquamation and recomposition are, and maybe kind of the selling points or some salient details for attendees?
Well, the very short version is natural organic reduction is the accelerated conversion of human remains to soil. It's human composting, but it's done in a contained vessel that is then reused. And so it accelerates what nature does on its own by giving the microbes and bacteria that are in our bodies the perfect environment to do their work and do their essential job in the most efficient fashion. So it takes about 30 days in the perfect environment to completely convert human remains to soil. And so natural organic reduction is the vessel that provides that environment for that magic to happen. The end result is soil. It's about 2 yards of soil, which fills a flatbed or no, 1 cubic yard of soil that fills a short bed pickup truck. It's a lot of dirt because the body is placed with wood chips and alfalfa and other organic materials to let the microbes do their job and break down the body. Once it's available, we'll see what the results is of what families want to collect, anticipating that most families will not want to transport a cubic yard of soil. So I know at least Recompose in their plans is partnering with a forest restoration organization that is looking at a plot of land in southern Washington that was improperly logged almost 100 years ago and still hasn't recovered because there's no topsoil. So providing the soil to help rejuvenate that land.
That's wonderful.
Very Cliff Notes edition. We will be having another webinar on natural organic reduction and other funeral options in the summer at some point.
Well, I think we might have actually gotten to everybody. Let me just double check. This is last call if you have any lingering questions. We've covered a lot of bases today.
While you're looking, I'll just go ahead and share. If you come up with any other questions or something strikes you right after we turn off, you can always reach out to us at info@peoplesmemorial.org, or our phone number is 206-325-0489. All of our programming and information is free. If you'd like to support what we do, please contribute at peoplesmemorial.org/donate.
Okay, I think we've covered all of the questions, and but you know, we're kind of in the business of answering questions. So like Nora said, if you think of something later, feel free to let us know on here. I'm the one that answers that email, or my intern. So it's not just going out into the ether. That is the best way to get in touch with us right now, since we are all working remotely. And I think that's everything from Facebook too.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll leave this up on the screen for a little bit, but keep an eye on our website and on our social media for the next topic of webinar that we'll be hosting. Thanks all.
Thank you.